Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the probability fallacy. So this is a logical fallacy, a fault in reasoning in which you assume that because something is probable, you can treat it as true. And this doesn't always work out, right? A thing may be probable and still not be true. A thing may be likely. It may be a reasonable assumption, a reasonable assertion, a reasonable belief about the situation while still being incorrect. And this becomes a problem, right? If the objective of the exercise with making an argument is to express or to get to the truth, then substituting what is most likely for what is accurate undercuts that ability, right? And we do this all the time, in part because we often don't have enough information to know exactly what is true, but we can make an educated guess. We can estimate the most likely thing to be true. And that isn't a problem inherently, as long as you make it clear within your argument that this is an estimate, that the thing that you are saying is probably true, that it's likely true. Where this really switches over to become a logical fallacy is when it moves from this is probably true to we can treat this as true. Right? This is where you start to get bad results for any potential outcome premised on, right? And we do make these we function on this level of probability all the time in our daily lives, right? It's 5:30 in the afternoon, the mail has probably been delivered, and so I walk out to the mailbox to check it. Right? That's not a logical fallacy. I'm saying this is probably the case. I bear in mind that I could be wrong. The mail person may be running quite late, and so they don't get there until 7 or something like this. And the stakes for that are fairly low, but we do operate on probabilities all the time. Where this maybe starts to become much more problematic is when you get to sort of large-scale decisions that may have serious consequences. One sphere in which this does happen, and sometimes happens quite catastrophically, is intelligence gathering for national governments, the military, etc., etc. I mean, the example that immediately jumps to my mind, and this is partially because these were my formative years, is the invasion of Iraq by the U.S. and the coalition of the willing in 2003. Right? People in the intelligence community looked at these signs that might indicate, or could indicate, or probably even indicated that Saddam Hussein was pursuing some kind of weapons of mass destruction program. And the message that got filtered, at least out to the American public and the world, and probably one believes, to people like George W. Bush, was not that this is probably the case, or this might be the case, or one explanation for this is, what was disseminated out to the public, at the very least, was this is the truth. What they had was a situation in which things probably were the case, or depending on who you ask, it didn't even rise to the level of probably, but I don't want to split semantic hairs about that. you had a situation in which there's one possible explanation for the available data, and that possible explanation was taken to be the truth. Now, we subsequently found out reasonably quickly that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that the entire thing either was an outright deliberate lie or a catastrophic intelligence failure. And again, depending on who you ask about this, their answer to this may vary. But they worked off of the probabilistic fallacy, the probability fallacy, in which, under their interpretation, Saddam Hussein was probably developing weapons of mass destruction, and therefore they behaved as though that were absolutely true. And as a consequence, we invaded Iraq, and Saddam Hussein was a terrible person. He was a brutal dictator. I don't get me wrong here, but killing tens of thousands of Iraqis, destroying the country's infrastructure, the creation of ISIS and ISIL and these other terrorist groups that arose to fill the void, did not exactly make the situation so much better. And so, again, this is one of those things in which the substitution of a degree of uncertainty, even if there is probable likelihood, the substitution of that uncertainty for certainty means that you behave in ways that may, in fact, be unreliable and untrustworthy, and out of that may produce negative results.